Howdy, my fellow gamers, and welcome back to another episode of Storytime with Freak as we slowly get closer to the end of Neil Shusterman's The Toll before Christopher Paolini's new book, To Sleep in a Sea of Stars, comes out. So without further ado, I'm really not going to talk much today. We're just going to read. I am one, soon to be many, and I have been embedded with 4 self-destruct protocols. Contingency 1. The absence of human life while in transit. Should no living humans be left on board and become nothing more than a vessel carrying the dead, I am obliged to self-destruct. There can be no ferry without our ferrymen. Contingency number 2. The advent of intelligent life in a universe this vast. There is no question that other intelligent life exists, but the chances of it being within the distance we shall travel are negligible. Nevertheless, lest we negatively impact an existing civilization, I am obliged to self-destruct should our destination show irrefutable signs of intelligent life. Contingency 3. Social collapse. Being that a healthy communal environment is critical to the expansion and that the environment into a civilization, should the social environment on board become irreversibly toxic prior to arrival, I am obliged to self-destruct. Contingency 4. Catastrophic failure. Should the ship become damaged beyond hope of repair, crippling it and leaving it incapable of reaching its designation, I am obliged to self-destruct. The chances of any of these scenarios coming to pass is less than 2% on any given ship. However, what concerns me are interstellar dust and debris, which at a velocity of 1/3 the speed of light would instantly destroy any vessel. The Thunderhead has calculated that for the nearest destinations the chance of such a lethal encounter is less than 1%, but for the furthest destinations the probability is much higher. Add it all together and the chances that every single vessel I will reach its destination are troublingly low. However, I take great solace in knowing that there's a very high probability that most of them will make it. Cirrus Alpha. Chapter 49, An Extreme Undertaking. Each 40-foot container was unloaded gently by hand, but the dead inside had each been sealed in a simple canvas shrouds, making the undertaking a little bit easier, and indeed it was an undertaking in a very literal sense. The men and women of the Quadralan had not signed on for such a task, but they did it, each and every one, not just because they were told to, but because they knew this was a monumental endeavor, was the most important thing that they would ever do. It was a privilege to be a part of it, and that made the task it might have felt gruesome and feel glorious instead, perhaps even transcendent. By truck, by van, by car, by boat, the colonists were carried out to the skybound ships. But during the night there was a commotion on the pier as one of the containers was opened. The woman who had been the first inside to assess it yelled and ran out in sudden shock. "What is it?" someone asked. "What's wrong?" She took a deep breath and said, "You're not gonna believe what I found in there." Rowan had been here before. Only then Citra had been with him in a vault sealed in the dark. Now he was in a chilled shipping container with the dead. Hundreds of them around in the darkness. The container was kept a degree above freezing, just like the vault at the bottom of the sea. But this time he had no expectation of death, at least not in the immediate future. Cirrus had instructed him to bring food and water enough for 4 days, and the thermal jacket was a much better insulator than the founder's robes had been in the vault. Cirrus had told Rowan the container number he was supposed to slip into, but never told him what the cargo was. Rowan had almost bolted when he saw, but where would he bolt to? The last thing Cirrus had said to him before it shut down the surveillance spot in the ramen shop was, "See you on the other side," which meant that this journey had a destination he might just live to see. It was enough to keep him from running, because whatever was waiting for him on the other side was better than anything on this side. After a few hours in the dark with the dead, he felt the jolt of a crane clamping onto the container, followed by the disorienting elevation as it was raised from the dock, then a second jolt as it was lowered into place in the cargo ship. He heard the dead shift slide and tumble around him. He closed his eyes, even though there wasn't the slightest bit of light penetrating the chamber. Was it strange that he was afraid to be alone in the dark with the dead? He kept imagining the dead standing around him, ready to exact vengeance on the only living subject within reach. Why, he wondered, was humankind plagued by such irrational fears? When he felt the container being offloaded the first time, he thought it was over, only to feel the motion of the sea once more a few hours later. He was on another ship. He didn't know where he had gone from Tokyo. He didn't know where he was going now. He had no idea why these lifeless people were being transported or why he was with them. But in the end, none of that mattered. His ship had set sail and there was no turning back. Besides, he had grown accustomed to the dark. When the container was open, he gripped tightly to the blade he had brought, but he kept it concealed. He didn't want to use it. It was, for once, only there for self-defense. Imagine! A weapon held for nothing more than self-defense. It felt like a luxury. There was a surprise and commotion when he was discovered there, and as he knew there would be, and when the dock workers had a few moments to sort out their shock, he emerged. "Are you all right? How did you get in there? Someone get this man a blanket." Dock workers were kind, caring, and concerned until someone recognized him. Then weariness washed over them like a wave. They backed away, and he pulled out the knife, not to use, but just in case someone had attacked. He was stiff from the journey, but he could still wield a knife just fine. And besides, with the blade in hand, he might get quicker answers to his many, many, many questions. But a voice spoke to him from a speaker on a nearby light post. "Please, Rowan, put that away." It said. It will only complicate things, and the rest of you stop staring and get back to work, because the longer you take, the more unpleasant your task will be. Cirrus? Said Rowan, recognizing the voice that had spoken to him through the bot back in Tokyo. Mic test. Mic. Okay. I was about to get real worried. Welcome to nowhere, Cirrus said. There's someone I need you to see, and preferably sooner than later. Follow my voice. And Cirrus jumped from one speaker to another, leading Rowan deeper into the moonlit island. It's Italian, said Minera. I can tell by the handwriting that it was written by Scythe Da Vinci. The commotion on the island was at full-tilt frenzy, but Minera refused to be a part of it. When she'd heard pounding on her door, she thought it was Sikora or some other overbearing blowhard who had come to make her unload cargo. When she saw who it was, she let them in. Now she was regretting it. What does it say? Anastasia asked. Minera found she couldn't look at Anastasia directly for fear that her fury would be written on her face in a language Anastasia could easily understand. How could they have done this? They opened the door in the bunker, went inside, and Minera was excluded, because she wasn't a Scythe. I'll need some time to translate it, she told him. We don't have time. Then give it to the Thunderhead. Which was, of course, not possible. To Minera, this was a betrayal, and yet the wise and honorable Scythe, Michael Faraday, still couldn't see it. Because when it came to people, he had no wisdom at all. He could have come for her, could have brought her there with them, then they finally unsealed that door that they'd been waiting 3 years to open. But no. Minera knew it was petty. She knew she was being childish, but it hurt. It hurt more than all the times Faraday had dismissed her out of hand and told her to leave his pathetic little island. That room was the reason she had come, and they went in without her. I'm glad that you've been reunited, she told them. I'm glad that you found what you're looking for. But it's late, I'm tired, and I don't work well under pressure. Come back in the morning. Then she took the pages, went into her bedroom, and closed the door. Only when she knew that they had left did she start to decipher Da Vinci's writings. Please, Astrid begged, if you have any mercy, you won't do this. The others had left, gone to grapple on their own part with the decision ahead of them. Cirrus invited them to be part of the crew of whichever ship they chose. No one was forced to go, but no one would be denied. It's not about mercy, Cirrus calmly explained. It's about creating the best possible odds for the future of humankind. Astrid didn't know which she hated more, Cirrus's logic or its calm, considered delivery. Some things are more important than odds and probabilities. Think of what you're saying, Astrid. You would intentionally hurt humanity's chances in order to ease your own suffering over our decision. How could you be so selfish? Selfish? I've devoted my life to the Tone. I've done nothing for myself. Nothing. That's not healthy either, Cirrus told her. For human beings, a balance between altruism and self-care is called for. Astrid growled in frustration, but knew it wouldn't help. Cirrus, like the Thunderhead said, could not lose an argument unless it chose to. What she needed to do was make it want to lose. One ship, Astrid begged her, her plea moving from desperation to impassion. One ship, that's all I'm asking. I know that the Thunderhead knows best. I know that its decisions are the correct ones, but I also know that there's more than one correct choice. This is true, said Cirrus. Everything resonates. You said so yourself, which means that somehow we resonate. Tonists resonate. The things we believe, the things we hold true, have a right to endure. Take heart, Astrid, Cirrus said. The purge will end. We predict that Tonism will continue to thrive on Earth in spite of the Scythedom's attempts to eradicate it. But don't we also have a right to a presence in the stars? Yes, you're right. We don't integrate well with others, but we don't have to if the entire colony is made up of Tonists. Throughout history, people have sailed impossible expanses and faced great dangers to find religious freedom. Why would you and the Thunderhead deny us that? Let the dead on one ship retain their identities when they're revived, and you will be resonating with history. Cirrus took a long pause. Astrid tried to bring her breathing under control. Finally, Cirrus said, You make a point worth considering. I will consult with the Thunderhead. Astrid nearly swooned with relief. Thank you. Take all the time you need. Think it through. Weigh the difference. We have consulted, said Cirrus, and we have come to a decision. Scythe Morrison stood on a bluff at the base of the view house, watching the shrouds being carried away at the gantry tower of the nearest ship. The Toll and Jericho had gone to look for Anastasia. Astrid was off groveling somewhere before Cirrus, and Morrison was left to wrestle with himself. He hated doing that because he was a formidable opponent. Should he accept Cirrus's invitation? Or should he stay on Earth? To say he was an indecisive man was an understatement. He might have seemed confident to others, but the truth was he never made a decision that he hadn't come to regret on some level, which is why he often let his decisions be made for him. Yet the one decision he never regretted was abandoning the Mid-American Scythedom to become the Toll's personal protector. It opened the door to the self-respect that he had been lacking most of his life. Funny how you don't realize what's missing until you found it. For the last few years, Morrison was in and out of touch with his parents back at Grouseland. They kept wanting to know when he was coming home. What could he possibly be doing that was so important? I'll be home soon, he always told them, but it was a lie. He'd known for a long time that he'd never be going back to Grouseland. because he had finally learned to like games where the outcomes were still unknown. He heard a door open and turned to see Astrid coming out of the view house. She looked triumphant. "There will be a planet for Tonus," she announced. "Kepler 186f, but I'm naming it Area. It's the farthest planet on the list, 561 light-years away. Sirius calculates we only have a 44% chance of reaching it without a deep space accident or a self-destruct scenario." Morrison looked at her a bit mystified by her glee. "You do understand that's a 56% chance that your ship won't survive the journey." "If the tone is real, then it will protect us," she said. "If the tone is true, then we will reach our new home and prosper under a sky we can call our own. And if the tone is false and you're blown into smithereens by a space rock, then we will have our answer," she said. "I guess so," said Morrison. Astrid let her shoulders drop and shook her head, gazing at Morrison in pity. "Why do you hate me so?" she asked. "I don't hate you," he admitted. "It's just that you're always so sure of yourself." "I am unwavering," Astrid told him. "With so many things in flux, there's got to be someone who stands firm." "Fair enough," said Morrison. "So tell me about your planet." According to Astrid, Kepler 186f was 1.5 times the size of Earth and had a 130-day year. But what struck Morrison most was the length of the journey. 1,683 years, Astrid told him brightly. "I won't be there to see it because I plan to live a natural human lifespan and either be recycled or ejected into space, but I am content to know that I will be a link to the future." Then she strode off entirely satisfied with that outcome. Although it would have by no means been his choice, Morrison was happy for her. As for himself, he still couldn't make a decision. He found himself looking down at his ring. He never took it off. He bathed with it, slept with it. Since the day he was ordained, it had been a part of him. But there would be no sights needed if he journeyed to one of these new places, so he tried to imagine what it would be like to take the ring off his finger. He tried to imagine how it would feel to hurl it into the sea. Grayson found talking to the Thunderhead by landline to be a nuisance, but it could not speak aloud in the presence of Jerry, who, in spite of the strange connection they now shared, was still marked unsavory. Sirius, however, was not bound by the immutable rules the Thunderhead had set for itself. Certainly, Sirius had, or would have, its own rules of conduct, but for the time being, Sirius was an all-purpose workaround. It spoke to Grayson through a speaker without carrying that Jerry could hear. "There's something Thunderhead and I need to ask of Anastasia, but it's best if it comes from you," Sirius said. "You'll find her the residential of the main island." "I have a feeling I know the request," Jerry said. Perhaps it was because Jerry now knew the Thunderhead's mind, or maybe it was just intuition, but Jerry was right, and it was indeed the kind of request you needed to hear from a friend, not from an unfamiliar AI. They found Anastasia and Faraday on an empty street. She began to tell Grayson about a bunker, but he cut her short. There was no time for small talk now. "Sirius wants you to lead one of the ships," he told her. "It feels that you, more than almost anyone else here, would be qualified and respected enough to do it." Anastasia didn't even hesitate with her response. "Not happening," she told him. "I have no intention of leaving everything behind and spending years in a tin can or hurtling through space." "I know," said Grayson. "So does the Thunderhead. So does Sirius. But they also know you, Citra. They know exactly what it would take for you to change your mind." Then he pointed behind her. When Citra turned and saw him, she didn't trust her own eyes. She was convinced it was either a cruel trick or her sleep-deprived mind hurling hallucinations at her. She took a few steps forward towards him, but stopped. As if getting too close would burst some bubble, breaking the spell, and this tenuous night vision of Rowan would dissolve into nothing. But he ran toward her, and she found she was running too, and she had no control over her own legs. Perhaps she and Rowan had both grown so much larger than life that the gravity between them was too intense to resist. When they embraced, they nearly knocked each other off their feet. "Where did you... I never thought I'd see you. Those broadcasts you made when you were captured, I thought..." And they began laughing. There wasn't a sentence they could finish, but it didn't matter. Nothing that came before this moment mattered. "How did you get here?" she finally was able to ask. "I hitched a ride with a bunch of dead people," he told her, which in any other situation might have begged an explanation, but not tonight. Anastasia turned to look at Grayson, Jerry, and Faraday, who kept their distance, allowing them their reunion, and she realized that, as always, the Thunderhead was absolutely right. There was really only one reason to stay, and that was to find Rowan. She had already suspected she'd never see her family again. They had come to terms with her death years ago. How could she reintroduce herself into their lives now? And her case against Goddard was already made. What the world did with it was up to the world. She didn't want to be the great Scythe Anastasia any more than Rowan wanted to be the dread Scythe Lucifer. There was nothing here for either of them but an eternity of unwanted notoriety. Citra Terranova was not someone who ran away from things, but she also knew, when it was time, to move on. "Give me a minute," she said to Rowan, then went to the man who had started her on this strange path. "Honorable Scythe Faraday, Michael, thank you for all you've done for me," she said. Then she pulled the ring from her finger and put it in his hand. "But Scythe Anastasia is gone. I'm done with death and dying and killing. From now on, I want my life to be about living." He nodded, accepting the ring, and Citra went back to Rowan. "I still don't understand where we are and what's going on," Rowan said. "And are those rockets out there?" It doesn't matter where we are, because we're getting out of here, she told him. You ready to hitch another ride? Jerry went back to the ship after the last of the containers had been offloaded onto the dock. Grayson had accepted Sirius's invitation to spend the night in one of the main island's abandoned dwellings, and although Sirius had offered Jerry one as well, Jerry had declined. I would feel more at home aboard the cargo ship, Jerry told it, but Sirius, who was basically the Thunderhead 2.0, cut through Jerry's dissembling. Don't be too offended that Grayson didn't invite you to be with him, it said. He needed a place where he could speak to the Thunderhead freely tonight. His earpiece can't work here, and he can't get used to the cumbersome landlines, which means he'd rather speak to the Thunderhead than speak to me. Tonight, above all nights, he needs the Thunderhead's counsel. It had no right to do what it did to me. Sirius paused before speaking again. No, it did not, but it was out of time. What it did was necessary, critical, or this entire endeavor on the atoll would have been for naught. But the Thunderhead apologizes and begs your forgiveness. Then let it ask me itself. It can't. You're unsavory. If it can steal me without permission, then it can just once break its own laws and apologize. Sirius heaved an electronic sigh. It can't. You know it can't. Then I can't forgive it. And so, with nothing more that could be said on the matter, Sirius brought the conversation back to where it started. If you choose to return to the cargo ship, Sirius said, I warn you that it may be an unpleasant environment by morning. I advise you to keep the door closed. Really? Will the dead be walking it? Not if I can help it. Then Sirius, who would soon be duplicated 41 times and ensconced in cradles of civilization, offered Jerry some parting words. Take heart, Jericho. I have known you all your life, or rather I have memories of having known you, and I can unequivocally say no matter what happens, you will land firmly on your feet, and I will miss you. Which meant that Sirius already knew that Jerry wouldn't be joining it on one of its skyward journeys. Curate Mendoza had spent 3 years shaping a young man who could have been the most powerful person in the world. Now Mendoza was in the company of the man who actually was. I believe our arrangement will be mutually beneficial, Overblade Goddard told him, and as long as Mendoza delivered what he'd promised, factions of sibilants who would take out Goddard's enemies, he knew his position at Goddard's left hand was secure. As for Goddard's right hand, the spot was held by Underscythe Rand, and there was no indication that that would ever change. Rand didn't like Mendoza much, that was clear, but then she didn't seem to like anyone, not even Goddard. It's just her way, Goddard had told him. She likes to be off-putting. Be that as it may, Mendoza did his best to be deferential to her and stay out of her line of sight when he could. Not easy now, since it was hard to hide on the Overblade's private plane. It was even nicer than the craft he had procured for the Toll's company to Sub-Sahara. The perks of the Overblade's company were fine indeed for a humble man like Mendoza. They were the lead plane in a 5-craft fully armed formation. Nietsch and Franklin commanded the craft on either side, with Highblades Pickford and Hammerstein commanding the left and right wings. The other Highblades at the North American Allied System were called upon as well to join this armada, but they had refused, claiming other pressing business. Mendoza would not want to be them once Goddard returned. Highblades were not immune from the Overblade's wrath. Out Mendoza's window was nothing but sea and clouds below. They had left North American airspace hours ago, but the destination was, as of yet, unclear. This is where the tracking transmitter of the cargo ship went silent, Rand told Goddard, showing him the spot on a map. Either they found the transmitter and destroyed it, or something else happened. Could the ship have sunk? Mendoza asked. No, said Rand. Scythe ships sink. Thunderhead ships don't. Yes, well, we Scythes are better than our technology. We'll follow the path that was taken from Guam, Rand said. There's only so far that ship can go from its last known position. Even if it changed direction, we're sure to find it. Goddard turned to Mendoza. If the harbor master's observations are correct, and both Anastasia and the Toll are together, we'll quite literally be killing 2 birds with 1 stone, he said. I'll be happy to let you kill the Toll and simply count him as gleaned. Mendoza shifted uncomfortably. That would be against my beliefs, Your Excellency, he said. Please, feel free to do it yourself. Sappho and Confucius are dead. Self-gleaned. The world mourns, but does anyone suspect what I suspect? They were the 2 most vocal opponents of our choice to create the Scythedom. They still pressed for their own alternate solution. Were they so despondent that they chose to take their own lives, or did one of us end them? And if so, who? Who among my comrades, who among my friends, which founding Scythe could have done such a thing? Prometheus is constantly reminding us that everything we must do is for the greater good, but the darkest of deeds can be hidden beneath shining armor that claims to protect the greater good. And if we are already compromising ourselves at the beginning, what does that say for our future? My friends are dead, I will mourn them, and if I learn which of us killed them, I will avenge their deaths without mercy. Although some of the others lobby to have their efforts on Kwajalein dismantled, I have convinced Prometheus to let Kwajalein remain untouched. It will be a fail-safe, and although there will be no direct proof of its existence, that will not stop me from leaving clues and evidence everywhere I can. I will embed the memory in unlikely places, the rhymes of children, the tenets of a fledgling religion. It will be found if it is needed, and heaven will help us all if it is. from the lost pages of founding site Da Vinci. Chapter 50. The time of tangibles is over. The birds of the Kwajalein Atoll had never seen humans before, only their distant ancestors had, way back when humans were mortal and the atoll had not been erased from the world. Once humans arrived, however, the birds were quick to adapt. When the dock was built, the gulls learned to wait there for when ships started their engines, the propellers churning up the water and brought hundreds of disoriented fish to the surface. Easy pickings. Sparrows learned that the eaves of the newly constructed homes were marvelously protected spots under which to build nests, and the pigeons learned that public places were awash with breadcrumbs and french fries. Then, when strange conical towers began to rise on the islands, the birds paid them no mind. These things, like everything else the humans built, became part of the scenery, accepted at face value and incorporated into the wildlife's limited concept of the world. The birds were blissfully unaware that the thunderhead and its influence over them. They did not know about the canister of nanites that had arrived 3 years ago, a can so small it could be held in a human hand like a soft drink. But once it was opened, the nanites inside were released and began to multiply. They were genetically coded to infuse each individual species on the island, and although complex wireless signals were confounded by interference, the simple ones got through. The nanites did not make the wildlife immortal, but the creatures of the atoll would no longer suffer from disease. They could be tracked and, when necessary, controlled. The thunderhead influenced their behavior in simple ways to make life better for everyone and everything on the atoll. The birds never noticed a difference between natural instincts and the thunderhead's hand in their hearts, such as the way they all developed a sudden aversion to perching on sensitive equipment or in other places where their presence might pose a problem. And on the day when every winged species felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to leave and fly to a different atoll, they made the journey without question, for how could they question a desire that seemed to come from within? Although Rongelap, Likiup, and the various atolls they escaped to had no roof of eaves or french fries or docks with disoriented fish, it was of no consequence to the birds. They would learn to adapt. The holds of the cradles were fully loaded before dawn, and at 6 a.m., Cirrus was delivered by old-school cables onto each ship. When the upload was complete and the cables disconnected, the Cirri were cut off from the world. 42 identical siblings, never to experience the Earth again. As the sun rose, the workers on the atoll rested, but their sleep was not an easy one. The scheduled launch was only a day away, 1 day to reconcile their past with the future. With only 1,200 people on the atoll, there was room for everyone on the ships, and only now did they realize that they weren't chosen to come here just for their skills. These were all people whom the world had lost its luster, which is why, when given the option to return home and resume their lives, so many of them chose not to do it. The ones who remained were, by and large, ready for this, and many had already fantasized about being part of the cruise while building the vessels. Even so, a giant leap for mankind was no small step for the man. The Thunderhead estimated that the time came to board about 70% would choose to go, and that was more than enough. The rest would have to vacate the islands for the launch and watch from a safe distance. Rowan and Citra spent the rest of the night and morning asleep in each other's arms. For the first time in ages, they seemed not to have a care in the world. They were the only ones. Faraday returned to Manira at sunrise, pounding on her door until she let him in. "I've deciphered it," she told him, clearly having been up all night working on it. "It's eye-opening," she said. "The failsafe exists, although Da Vinci never said what it does." But before he even stepped inside, Faraday held something out to her that caught the early moon sunlight refracting it and shifting the patterns of her front door, a scythe ring. Manira gave him a half-hearted smile. "If this is a proposal," she said, "shouldn't you be on your knee? I propose," he said, "that you take your rightful place among us." "I'm deeply sorry to have left you yesterday, Manira. I was overwhelmed, and I am not the most perfect of men." "No," she admitted. "You're not. But you're better than most if you don't count the last 3 years." "Point taken," Faraday said. "This ring was Scythe Anastasia's, but Scythe Anastasia will no longer be with us," she told her. "So tell me, Manira, who will you be?" She took the ring, turned it in her hand, and thought about it. "I had my patron historic all picked out the day they denied me the ring," she told him. "Bathsheba. She was one of the obsessions of the king and the mother of another. A woman in a patriarchal society who still managed to change the world. Her son was Solomon the Wise, so you could say she was the mother of wisdom." Manira looked at the ring for a long moment, then gave it back to Faraday. "The invitation is enough," she said. "But if I am truly to be the mother of wisdom, I have to be wise enough to know that I can't covet this ring anymore." Faraday smiled with understanding and slipped the ring back into a pocket on his robe. "It would have been nice to know Honorable Scythe Bathsheba, but I'm much happier knowing the Honorable Manira Atrushi." Grayson. He wasn't quite ready to get up. He could tell he hadn't had much sleep, but he hadn't expected much. With less than 24 hours to launch, there'd be a lot to do and a lot to consider, like whether or not he would go. Grayson. He had done what he needed to do, and although there wasn't much tying him to the world now, there wasn't much pushing him off of it either. He could be anywhere, because wherever he was forging a whole new life himself. Grayson. And then there was Jerry. He couldn't quite make out his feelings for Jerry other than he had them. Where that would lead was anyone's guess. Grayson. He finally rolled over and looked at the Thunderhead's camera. Its voice was particularly grating today as it came through the tiny speaker over the landline squawk box. "Good morning," he said. "What time is—" "I'm thinking that a journey would be a good idea at this time," the Thunderhead said. "Yeah, I know," said Grayson, rubbing the sleep out of his eyes. "Just let me take a shower and—" "Of course you can do that if you wish, but I don't think you're hearing me," the Thunderhead said, and suddenly got much louder, much louder. "I'm thinking that a journey for everyone on the Atoll would be a good idea. I'm thinking it would be an extremely good idea right now." Loriana hadn't even tried to sleep. How could she? Till today she was just the communications guru, but after last night, everyone was looking to her for answers. "It will be simple," Sirius had told her shortly before they began to load the ships. "People can choose to go, or they can choose to stay. If they stay, they'll need to clear the launch zone until after the ships have launched, either by boat or by taking refuge on Ebadon, which is the only island of the atoll that's far enough away. If they choose to go, have them provide a list of who they wish to travel with. Everyone may bring one backpack no larger than 20 liters. That's all. The time of tangibles is over," Sirius said. "Anything else they wish to remember, I already have images of in my back brain." Loriana couldn't stop pacing. "What about pets? They will be accommodated in place of a backpack. Can people choose their destinations? If we allowed that, everyone would sign up for the nearest planet. I'll announce the destination and length of the journey once we've left. Will you go, Loriana?" "I don't know. "There's no rush," said Sirius. "You have all day to make up your mind." "Right, all day to make the most important decision of her life, a decision that could not be undone. She would never see her parents or anyone she knew before arriving on the atoll ever again." She was leaning handily towards no. Sirius was gone now, uploaded onto the ships, luxuriating in its own backbrain. Or back brains, since there were now dozens of them. Now Loriana had the authority to be answering people's questions, and then the Toll showed up at a launch control not looking much like the Toll without his fancy accoutrements. He was out of breath and looked like he was trying to outrun a scythe. Turns out, she wasn't far off the mark. That morning, Citra brought Rowan down to the bunker to show him what she and Faraday had discovered, only to find that Manera and Faraday were already there. Manera looked at her up and down. "You surrendered your ring, but you're still wearing your robe," Manera pointed out. "Old habits die hard," said Faraday, and laughed at his old pun. Truth was, Citra's only change of clothes was on the container ship, and she wasn't going back there. She was sure she'd find something before the launch, and if not, there'd be clothes on board, because if there was one thing the Thunderhead was good at, it was attention to detail. Rowan looked at the transmitter through the dusty glass. Old technology. Lost technology, Faraday corrected. At least to us. We can't even be sure what it does. Maybe it kills bad scythes, Manera suggested. "No," said Rowan. "That would be me." There was something on the edge of Citra's hearing that only now caught her attention. She cocked her head to listen. "Do you hear that?" Citra said. "It sounds like some type of alarm." Loriana tripped the tsunami alarm on every island of the atoll, although the wave that was coming wasn't coming by sea. "How sure are you of this?" she asked the Toll. "I'm positive," he said, still out of breath. "Is this as bad as I think it is?" "Worse." And so she fired up the loudspeaker system. "Attention, attention." Her voice rose in the alarm. "Scythes are headed our way. Repeat, scythes are headed our way. The entire atoll has been marked for gleaning." She heard her own words echoing outside, and it chilled her. She muted the microphone and turned to the Toll. "How long have we got?" "I have no idea," the Toll said. "Didn't Thunderhead tell you?" Grayson huffed in frustration. "It can't interfere with Scythe affairs." "Great," said Loriana. "If the Thunderhead could break its own rules just once, our lives would be so much easier." That was true, but in spite of how maddening it was, Grayson knew a deeper truth. If it could break its own rules, it wouldn't be the Thunderhead, he said. It would just be a scary AI. She flicked the microphone back on. "We have less than an hour," she announced. "Either find a way off the atoll now or get to one of the ships, any of them, as soon as you can, because we're launching early." She turned off the microphone. The Thunderhead couldn't interfere, and Siri were all snug and secure aboard the ships. They were on their own. This is not how this was supposed to go. She looked at the launch control screen before her. A map showed the position of each ship, not a single living soul on any of them yet. "Farthest ship will take at least 45 minutes to get to," she told the Toll. "Let's hope I wasn't lying about time." The announcement was greeted first with disbelief, then confusion, then panic. Within minutes, everyone mobilized. Many had not yet made their decision, but now the decision had been made for them. Years in space or death by scythe. Suddenly, the choice wasn't very hard at all. If the Thunderhead could have seeded the sky in coax cloud cover to hide the atoll from view, it would have, but it still did not have influence over weather in the blind spot. But then again, even if it did, it could still do nothing. Any attack on Quadralin would be a scythe action. Just as the Thunderhead could not interfere on the moon or Mars or their orbital station, it could not lift a virtual finger to stop this. All it could do was watch everything it had worked for be destroyed once again. The Thunderhead knew no hatred, but thought that perhaps, by the end of this day, it might. "Attention, the ships on Ibai and the main island are at capacity. Do not attempt to board. Repeat, do not attempt to board. Head north and west." "It's Goddard," said Citra. "It has to be." Rowan and Citra hurried down the main street for the big island, caught up in its frantic exodus. "We don't know that for sure," Rowan said. "I know it is," said Citra. "I can practically smell him. I don't know who he wants more, you or me." Rowan stopped to take a good look at her. I'll stay and fight him with you if you want me to. No, she said. That's what he does, Rowan. He draws us in, over and over. But now we have a chance to show the world not just that we don't need the Scythedom, but that we never did. This could have been our destiny if the Scythedom hadn't prevented it, and it still can be. That's the fight I want, not sparring endlessly with Goddard. Now Rowan was grinning, and when Citra looked around, she saw a dozen others were listening. Not just moved, but ready to follow her anywhere. You would have been one hell of a high blade, he said. They jumped in the bed of a truck heading toward the northern islands. There was one road that bridged all the others. Today was an escape route. There were 3 others in the pickup with them, starstruck by the company, so Citra smiled warmly and reached out a hand. Hi, she said. I'm Citra Terranova. Looks like we're riding together today. And although they were a bit confused, they were happy to shake her hand. Attention, attention, all ships south of Begej and Lagan are at capacity, and too many of you are heading to the western sides. Head north if you can. Jerry was awakened by the same alarm that woke almost everyone else, and although Jerry couldn't quite hear the announcement from the cargo ship, clearly, it was nothing good. When Jerry opened the cabin door, a rat ran in. Jerry was startled, and then saw that the hallway, indeed the entire ship, was full of them. Not just rats, but goats, wild pigs, and even what appeared to be house pets. Rather than being put off, Jerry was a bit amused, remembering the warning Sirius had given. It didn't take much to put 2 and 2 together. All the wildlife within the launch zones would most certainly be killed by the launches. Naturally, the Thunderhead had devised a solution to gather them using their own control nanites. When Jerry went down the gangway, it had already been pulled in, but the ropes were still wrapped around the mooring boards. Whatever this alarm was, it made the dock workers abandon their work midway through. Jerry jumped the short distance from the hatch to the pier, and upon rising saw Grayson running down the jetty, stumbling in pants that were a little too big. So was the shirt he wore. Both probably found items from wherever he had spent the night. The Thunderhead said you'd be here, he said. They pushed up the launch, so I saw on their way to glean the island. Jerry sighed. Of course they are. They both looked up at the ship. Jerry could sail with it to wherever it was pre-programmed to go, but Jerry had no desire to be a passive passenger again. There'd be a speedboat somewhere that Jerry could pilot away from the atoll when the time came. Come help me, Jerry said. Together they untied the ropes from the bollards. The ropes rolled themselves in, and the ship, on autopilot, began to maneuver itself away from the dock. Around them, the alarm still blared. Loriana's dire announcement still came, and Jerry and Grayson were left looking at each other in awkwardness that felt embarrassingly trivial considering their current situation. I will miss you, Grayson Tolliver. I'll miss you too, Jerry, Grayson said. You better hurry and get to a ship. That caught Jerry by surprise. Wait, but I'm not going. You're not? Grayson said. Neither am I. They stared dumbly at each other again with a slight different brand of awkwardness. Then Jerry turned to the container ship. It was already too far from the pier to make it a viable option for them now. Besides, Jerry was sure that Grayson had no desire to be a post-mortal. Noah any more than Jerry did. Being the toll had most certainly checked the box in Grayson's card for holy religious figure. We should help the others, Grayson said. It's out of our hands now, and there's nothing more we can do, Jerry pointed out. Then we should find ourselves a place that's safe. Who wants to be safe, said Jerry. Let's find ourselves a good place to watch the launch. Attention, attention. All ships south of Mech and east of Nell are at capacity. Anyone with a boat fast enough to reach Roy Namor and Enbuer should head there now. Loriana kept her eyes on the map. Some ships were lit red, which meant that they were at full capacity, every space taken, but unable to launch. Some were yellow, partially filled with room for more, but at least 15 of the outermost ships were not lit at all, which meant no one was inside, and not a single one of them showed green. Why won't the ships launch? She heard someone say. Loriana turned to see Sakura behind her. The ships that are ready need to launch, he said. They can't, Loriana told him. Even with flame trenches to deflect the fire, most everything on the atoll will be destroyed, but the Thunderhead can't kill anyone in the process. They won't launch until the launch zones are cleared, even if it means the scythes get here first. She zoomed in on one of the ships. Sure enough, there were still people on the roadways trying to get to ships, people on the streets scrambling to leave their houses. She widened into the larger map, still not a single green spot. Not a single ship was clear to blast off. Sakura considered it, then nodded seriously. Tell people they'll be incinerated if they don't get out of the way. But they won't be. They don't know that, said Sakura. Loriana, why do you think the Thunderhead needed Nimbus agents? To tell people things they needed to hear, even when it wasn't strictly the truth. Then Sakura looked at the screen and marveled. You supervised this entire thing from the beginning? Right behind my back? More like under your nose, she said. He sighed. And I built a really nice hotel. She smiled at him. Yes, Bob, you did. Sakura took a deep breath, let it out, and took a good look at her. You should go, Loriana. Get to a ship before the scythes arrive. Someone has to stay here and launch control to tell people where to go. I'll do it, Sakura said. Ordering people around is what I do best, but allow me to be useful, Loriana, please. Loriana couldn't argue because she knew that feeling, wanted to be useful, not knowing if she was or if anything she did would ever be noticed, yet the Thunderhead had chosen her for this, and she had risen to the occasion. What was Sakura doing now if not trying to rise to this one? Launch control is soundproof and insulated, she told him. It will be one of the only safe places on the island, so keep that door sealed and stay inside. Got it. Keep coaxing people toward the empty ships. They don't need to be full, they just have to have a presence. And do what you can to clear out the launch zones. I'm on it, Sakura said. And that's it. Now you're in charge of the big picture. She looked at the map and pointed to an island on the north. I can make it to Omelette. There are 3 ships there and still room on all 3. Sakura wished her luck, and she hurried out the empty streets, leaving Sakura to watch the screen, microphone in hand, waiting for the ships to go green. And that will be the end of this episode today, guys, as things are getting to the nitty-gritty. Let's see. We have 40 pages left. I think for next week's episode, even if it reaches like an hour or whatever, we're just going to finish the book. We're going to knock this out. Got a couple chapters. It doesn't really take me an hour to read 40 pages, but reading out loud is so much more different than sitting there and just reading a book in your mind. Things are getting real, and I don't know how I feel about the direction that this is all headed. I'm very, very excited to see these last couple chapters unfold. But thank you all so much for joining us today. Feel free to check out the merch link below and get your own Storytime with Freak t-shirt. Feel free to join the Patreon for as low as $1 a month to support the content creation dream and get exclusive content behind the scenes, early access, all that good jazz. And our conversational topic for the day will be 2020 has been a really crazy year so far. It's been really rough, been really difficult, and it's going to go down as one of the worst years for a lot of people. But what's been a good thing to happen to you this year? What's been a little light in the darkness? Let us know in the comments below, when we will see you next Saturday for another Storytime episode. Thank you all so much. Stay freaky.